Hello, pet. You're listening to the Erotic Hypnosis podcast, hosted by Goddess Serona. Thank you for being here today, and thank you to my patrons for making this episode possible. If you'd like to become a patron and support my podcast, you can do that by clicking the link in my description and joining any of my Patreon tiers. If you'd like to have your own custom hypnotic trance created and voiced by me, you can book a custom file at the link in my description. I would love to create a special trance just for you. And lastly, if you'd like to participate in my No Nut November challenge, I have a link in my description where you can read all about the fun that we will have playing a game all month long. And that's all of my announcements. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. Basically, I'm going to go through the psychology behind why people, or men specifically, might be attracted to wearing chastity devices. I have an article, and it's on a website called Lock Kink. The title of the article is Psychology of Chastity Cages, Understanding the Desire for Sexual Restraint and Control. The writer starts off by saying that human sexuality is complex and deeply personal, and it's shaped by emotions, desires, and cultural influences, which is true. And among the many ways that people explore their sexuality, chastity devices can be a way that you explore different aspects of your sexuality, like submission or self-control, or understanding your psychological and physical limitations when it comes to your need to orgasm or your desire to orgasm, or a combination of several different factors like your desire to orgasm, your biological need to orgasm, and your desire to be submissive to a dominant. For example, in my case, it would be a Femdom dynamic. So I would be controlling men as they were wearing a chastity cage, or what I prefer is mental chastity, which is what we're talking about today. But most commonly, chastity cages are used because, again, there's not a lot known about mental chastity and how that works. Even when I was trying to find something, any type of research about it, I couldn't find anything. So a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is research that deals with sexuality and somewhat the brain, but there's not a lot of research about the subconscious and sexuality and how that plays into what we're attracted to, what we desire, and things like that, which I'm surprised by and not surprised by, because it's still such a taboo subject that I think a lot of scientists are afraid to really deep dive into it, and or this is more likely, they don't get the funding for their research because it's taboo. So there's fantasy fulfillment. Even if you're not submissive, or even if you're not someone who really craves to 100% give up control all the time, it may still be a fantasy of yours to try chastity and see if you like it, or try living the fantasy of being denied. It could be a role play thing. It could be like a week-long thing that you try with yourself or a partner or whatever. It could just be something that you want to explore and see what it's like. It doesn't have to be a lifestyle. And then fetish and sensory play. Wearing a chastity cage does heighten other senses. So if you're someone who wants to explore different aspects of sensory play, but you can't do that because you're so focused on your dick or whatever, it could help to wear a cage so that mentally and physically, you know that's off the table. So you can focus on other aspects of sexuality. You could focus on eating your partner out, or giving your partner, more sensual touching. Your partner could touch you more sensually for a longer amount of time. and really explore other aspects of sensation. You could introduce other sensations into your play that you normally wouldn't, because you would be so focused on one specific aspect of playing with your partner. Or even if you're by yourself, you could still introduce different touch, different toys, different whatever. It's something that is really fun to explore. And I guess talking about the positive mental aspects of it, we should also talk about the perceived negative things around chastity. So there are a lot of misconceptions that people have about wearing a chastity cage, especially as a man. But a general one that's not specifically for men is that participating in wearing a chastity cage or having a dynamic where you give control over your cage, if you give someone your keys, you can only do that if you're really into the BDSM lifestyle, or if you have some sort of dominant and you're hardcore into being a sub or whatever. And that's simply not true. As I just said, you can explore that for yourself, or you can explore that with your partner. Even if you've never explored anything kinky before, this is something that you could do that doesn't require any knowledge of being a BDSM practitioner or whatever. Obviously, do your research, find out what the best cage is for you, what works the best for your dynamic. There are different makes and styles and sizes. Go to a sex shop, talk to somebody. Don't just buy one and go for it. You do still need to do research. But it is beneficial to try something that's a little different, maybe something new, but you don't have to be into a kinky lifestyle all the way to try it. You don't. Another misconception is that wearing a chastity cage is about pain or punishment or discomfort. And that's not true. Largely, it's about control. It can be self-control. It can be giving control to someone else over your sexuality. Any form of control, that's normally what it's about. You should not feel uncomfortable in your chastity cage. If you're feeling discomfort, then it's either the wrong size or you have an allergy to whatever it's made out of. That should not be the case. If you feel discomfort, change your cage. Get a different one. Another misconception is that it's a sign of weakness, which is not true. It's not weak to control yourself. It's not weak to want to explore a deeper dynamic with a partner. It's not a weakness to want to control your sexuality. And it's also, I think, a good thing to want to try different things, to want to try to control the amount of times that you're allowed to come, not even as a power exchange, although that's very fun and I love that. I think that it's important for you as an individual to really try different things, and maybe chastity is a really, especially if you're doing it yourself, it can be a low stakes way of exploring your sexuality and seeing what you're capable of and what you want to be capable of. Like, for example, if you want to, let's just say, okay, I don't know. Let's say you want to hit a certain weight at the gym. This is just an example. If you want to do that, maybe you say, okay, I'm going to wear a chastity cage and only allow myself to come X amount of times until I reach that goal weight. This may or may not work for you, but it's a way that you could kind of reward yourself, in a sense, for reaching a goal. And it's completely dependent on you. And that's not a weakness. That's just a way of you exploring your sexuality in a different way. And then another misconception is that it's a permanent lifestyle. And that's simply not the case. You can explore chastity in several different ways, but it does not have to be permanent. It doesn't have to last even a week if you don't want it to. It just depends on yourself, and it depends on, if you're partnered, it depends on what you discuss together and what might work for you as a couple. So it's not a lifetime commitment that you have to be so worried about making. You could take it off at any point in time. So I don't know. I don't want to say that there's a ton of stigma around male chastity, but it's just such an interesting thing because it does play into male submission, which is just not talked about a lot. When I search around for it, like articles and things like that, or resources for male submissives, there's just not a lot out there. And that's directly because it doesn't fit the sociological standard for what men are supposed to be. So it's not really pushed forward because guys are not supposed to be submissive. So why would there be resources for men who want to be submissive or men who want to explore the opposite side of a power dynamic, things like that, which is unfair because there's so many people out there who would love to, but they don't know where to start. So hopefully my rambling today helps a little bit. There's another really interesting study, again, trying to understand how our subconscious interacts with our sexuality. Because we know that it does, but specifically, we don't have the research to look at to say this is how it does. So obviously, this is not comprehensive. This is just me looking at different things and trying to piece something together that makes sense. But there's an article for a study. It's from the National Library of Medicine. It was written by Barry R. Komisaruk and Maria Cruz Rodriguez del Cerro. And the title of the article is How Does Our Brain Generate Sexual Pleasure? I did not have the time to read this entire article, but there is a section here that does talk about the subconscious. And this is a very interesting article, so I will be adding it to the notes when I post the episode. But there is one part here. It says our childlike adaptive unconscious. Here I'm equating unconscious with subconscious, even though they don't specifically say subconscious, but I'm equating that to be the same thing. And it says, let us consider that there is an unconscious process in our brain that is responsive to our needs and desires, which it manifests by adjusting our bodily physical plant accordingly via our autonomic nervous system. It thereby regulates our circulatory system to support the behavior and visceral activity that our unconscious dictates, as if we were expressing our needs and desires in relation to our environment, physical and social, at each moment. A metaphor for the process is that the expression of the unfettered child in us. That child's brain would be regulating its bodily functions via its autonomic system. What if that pattern of autonomic activity occurs in real time in our adult body now, independent of our actual overt behavior? To the extent that our actual overt behavior is congruent with the pattern, it is a match. Pleasure. However, to the extent that our actual behavior is incongruent with the pattern, is it discomfort, pain, leading to organic pathology, i.e. psychosomatic disease, if chronic. All systems superimposed on each other, creating a multi-component, real-time little representation of ourself that advises or tries to drive our behavior. And then they go on to talk about how small things like sneezes or contracting muscles involuntarily feel pleasurable, like a small orgasm, because it lights up portions of the brain that feel pleasure. And they talk about how those are peaks in excitement, and then pain is like a negative of that. So we don't have that excitement. It's like the opposite sides of a magnet. One is a positive, one is a negative. And what really interested me in this article is they were talking about how it ties into the autonomic nervous system. And something that has really connected with me about how hypnosis works and how sexuality works and how we perceive different things on a subconscious level and how we protect ourselves when we are in a hypnotic state is that it's very connected. Our subconscious and our autonomic nervous system are extremely connected. And so I can't put it all together into words yet. I'm still kind of chewing on it in my brain. But there is a way that I can say what I want to say, and it will make sense, but I don't know if today's that day. What I'm trying to understand by putting together studies that have been done on sexuality and the subconscious with specifically today mental chastity is the reward of it, the payoff of it, and why it is so beneficial to people who participate in it. And we know the answers to some of those things. We know already why we love hypnosis. That's a personal thing. Hypnosis is very personal in general. It's extremely unique to each person. What works for you might work for somebody else, but it's hard to do hypnosis in a cookie cutter way. It needs to be personal for it to be strong, really strong. And I think it's the same when it comes to mental chastity, even if you're not using hypnosis to pair it with, because you can do mental chastity without hypnosis. For example, I have my No Nut November challenge coming up next month, and I'm not using hypnosis during that month. I'm going to be playing games, and it will be more, I would call it brainwashing than hypnosis. Nobody's going to go into trance. Nobody's going to drop and feel the effects of a hypnotic trance. I will use some of the triggers that I've already installed to people who've listened to my trigger conditioning series, but largely it's going to be gamified, and it's going to be based on feeding dopamine to the brain. And that has nothing to do with hypnosis. But if you were in a more intimate setting, so for example, if it was just me and one other person and we were doing this, I could incorporate hypnosis. And it would be a much more personal, much more intense version of the exact same thing. And it doesn't matter if you wear a chastity cage or not, because it's all about your mentality. It's all about what you decide to do and carrying that out. But in that same vein, how does control from another person play into that? And again, it could go two ways. So there's what you could do if you're not using hypnosis. And if you're not using hypnosis, it's simply trusting the other person to do what they say they're going to do. So, for example, I'll just keep going with my game that I've got going on next month. I've set up a series of games and challenges and different things for people to enjoy, and I'm trusting them to obey my rules. So it doesn't matter to me if they wear a cage or not. There are going to be challenges where they have to touch themselves, and if they wear a cage, they won't be able to participate in that, but that's fine. But it's all about the trust aspect. It's about, I am giving you a task, and I'm expecting you to have the strength and the determination and the commitment to follow that task through. And that is where earlier we were talking about deepening emotional intimacy, deepening trust, all those things. That's where that comes into play, because that shows your character, that shows your commitment to the dynamic or the game or whatever it is that you're doing. Even if it's just to yourself, it shows that you are someone who can follow through. And that alone is rewarding. But if you introduced hypnosis to it, which is a little bit more difficult to do on a larger scale, but if you introduced hypnosis to it, you could, with a person, take them into a trance, and you could give them suggestions over a period of time. For example, I could drop someone into trance, and I could say, after they were at a certain depth, and I could say, you are wearing an invisible chastity cage right now. For the duration of this trance, you are becoming accustomed to wearing that chastity cage, and you can't take it off. You're not interested in touching yourself. You're not interested in playing with yourself unless I give you permission. If I give you permission to touch yourself, you suddenly become so horny. You become so needy. You become so desperate. You have to do it. But the second that I say stop, you once again become completely unable, uninterested, whatever, in touching yourself. And after this trance is over, You're going to wear that chastity cage for as long as I want you to wear it. And I'm going to give you a mantra to reinforce that control every single day. And I'm going to give you a trance that you can listen to drop you back down, a short one, maybe 10 minutes a day, to drop you back down into my control and to remind you that you're wearing that chastity cage and you can't take it off. Only I hold the keys to that chastity cage. And then I'd bring them up out of trance and drop them back down and reinforce and reinforce and reinforce. And over time, that would become part of their subconscious. Okay. I can see some people are excited by that. But over time, this is just the way that hypnosis works because it's a direct line to your subconscious. As long as you didn't have some sort of subconscious block against that, it would become part of who you are. So that trigger would become part of your subconscious programming. And it does depend on certain things, how long that would last. It would need to be reinforced frequently for the effects to remain in place. It's not something that you can just set and forget. That's not how it works. You would need that reinforcement. And eventually you would come to a place where you wouldn't need it as often, but you would still need it on a regular basis because it's not part of who you are on your own. It's like a software modification or a patch or something. You can add it in, but it needs to be maintained and it needs to be updated because as a human being, you're constantly evolving and changing and growing throughout your life. So you need to update all of the conditioning that you receive in hypnosis too. So those are just two different ways that you could go about it. But I don't personally want to hypnotize people like that on a large scale. It's not impossible. It can be done. But because people are so unique and individual and different, I prefer to do it more personally than trying to do it on a wider scale because a lot of people won't be able to drop the way that I would like for them to or get deep enough for them to really integrate the suggestions and the commands that I am giving. But even without hypnosis, there are aspects of mind play and manipulation that go into this sort of thing. Because once you take the ability to touch yourself and the ability to come or the ability to play with yourself on a regular basis for any reason, and you give that control to someone else, automatically you're immediately playing a mind game. And specifically with me, I'll talk about the way that I like to do it because I can't speak for anybody else. But the way that I like to do it and the way that I've planned to do it, which I'm excited about, is there are going to be 4 different games, 1 game per week. And if you've listened to my JOI files, specifically the spin the wheel one, it's going to be set up like that. But instead of just 1, there's going to be 4, and they're going to build on each other. So by the 4th week, you're going to be biting your knuckles and just like need it so bad. But alongside that, there is going to be mental conditioning. So for example, there's going to be a mantra that you're going to repeat every day. And I'm not going to tell you what's in the mantra, but the themes are very much so giving up control, obedience, craving, desire, arousal, things like that. And throughout the day, I'll be sending messages. Like, for example, I know that you're familiar with the game that I like to play, red light, green light. So throughout the day, not every day and not all day, at completely surprising times that you do not have any control over, I'll say green light. And then you have to go to the bathroom or wherever you are, and you have to touch yourself. You have to edge for as long as that green light is in effect. And then eventually I'll say red light, and then you have to go about your life as normal until the next time I send a text that says green light. And that is an example of creating a dopamine addiction. Eventually you'll get to the point where you'll start craving that message. You'll start waiting for it. You'll start looking for it. You'll start wondering when it's going to come and when I'm going to give you permission. because it's unpredictable. So even though I'm not using hypnosis, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to be using mind games and manipulation. And in a wider context, playing those types of games, mind games, manipulation games, while you're caged with your dom or your partner, whoever that might be, even if you don't use hypnosis, it still will add a mind element to your play that is very exciting and fun and hard to stop doing because you like it so much. I will give a caveat to this. You should not stay in chastity, whether mental or physically caged. You should not prevent yourself from coming for too long of an amount of time because that will result in actual medical issues. So you should still be coming regularly, but playing with amounts of time and finding what your limit is can be very fun. And I highly recommend it. Let me see if I have any other articles that I want to talk about. I do. I have one more thing that I want to talk about. So there is an article in the Scientific American. I mean, there may or may not be more research that has come out since then, but this is specifically about a study that was done, and it gives a story about a woman who participated in the study, and it was a study about sexual desire in women. And I found this interesting because of a certain passage in the article. The article is called The Orgasmic Mind, The Neurological Roots of Sexual Pleasure. Because again, I was trying to find information about how our subconscious influences our sexuality, and I wanted to create a correlation between our subconscious and male submissiveness and why men might be drawn to chastity for whatever reason, but I couldn't find enough research to really back up that correlation. I can make guesses all day long. I can even make informed guesses based off of what people have self-reported, but I'd rather not do that here and now. But maybe there could be like a discussion thread later, which I would love. But for right now, I'm not going to make that conjecture, but I will read this article. And the first part, it's talking about how in this study, the participants were given patches, like not nicotine patches, but the same idea. And they were told that it was a testosterone patch that was meant to treat hypoactive sexual desire disorder, which means that the women had no libido. They were not interested in sex at all. And testosterone is a hormone that's ordinarily produced by the ovaries, and it's linked to female sexual function. So, excuse me, I'm wrong. This article was published in 2008, but the study was actually conducted in 2005. So the women who participated in this study had undergone operations to remove their ovaries. And I promise I will circle this around to my point about chastity. But there is a woman named Marianne, who, and that may or may not be her real name, but during the 12 week, I can't talk all of a sudden. During the 12 weeks of the trial, Marianne felt her sexual desire return. She touched herself and unleashed erotic sensations and vivid sexual fantasies. She could eventually make love to her husband again, and she experienced an orgasm for the first time in almost 3 years, which, go Marianne, that's awesome. But the interesting thing is that Marianne received a placebo patch. She did not receive any testosterone. So what she was experiencing was completely orchestrated in her own mind. She just thought that she was receiving a medication. So Marianne's experience underlines the complexity of sexual arousal. Far from being a simple issue of hormones, sexual desire and orgasm are subject to various influences on the brain and the nervous system. Do you remember that article that I was reading a little while ago that talked about how sexuality and excitement were very linked to the autonomic nervous system? This is just more evidence to confirm that. And the brain and the nervous system control the sex glands and the genitals. So Marianne's desire may have been invigorated by conversations or thoughts about sex. It could have even picked up because she thought that she was receiving a medication. The bottom line is Marianne's sexual desire picked up because she thought that it should, which is so interesting because, yes, the mind is truly extraordinary. And achieving orgasm, brain imaging studies show, involves more than heightened arousal. It requires a release of inhibitions and control in which the center of the brain's vigilance shuts down in males. And in females, various areas of the brain involved in controlling thoughts and emotions become silent. What does that sound like to you? Because to me, that sounds like hypnosis. A release of inhibitions, a relaxation, a state where you are suggestible, where you are feeling quiet and relaxed, and you're not really focused on anything in specific. You're not really focused on anything in particular. You're thinking about whatever it is that is suggested. Oh my God, I can't talk. You're thinking about whatever has been suggested to you. Marianne thought it was suggested to her that she was taking a medication to help her become more sexually aroused, to have more of a sex drive. And because of that, yes, Marianne is a very good candidate for hypnosis. Really, everyone is a good candidate for hypnosis. But you see the point that I'm trying to make. Hypnosis, whether you're dropped into trance or not, human beings are very, very suggestible. And in hypnosis, that suggestibility is really heightened. And so, bringing it back to chastity, if you are wearing a chastity cage and you have a goal with wearing that chastity cage, it could be anything. Mental chastity can deepen or heighten the pleasure, the dedication, the commitment, the reward, whatever it is you're seeking from experiencing chastity. It can be deepened and heightened and controlled and made more exciting by adding that mental element, whether it is simply playing mind games and controlling, or if it's taking it deeper and using hypnosis. Because you can do either or you can do both. That's up to you, however you choose to do it. And you don't have to wear a cage for mental chastity to be rewarding. You don't have to use hypnosis even for it to be rewarding, but it will make it more rewarding if you make it a deeper suggestion. And that's all for this episode of the Erotic Hypnosis Podcast. Thanks for listening. And until next time, have a great day, pet.